Chapter 5. The remaining animal and vegetable life and Mecca itself, The camel has no hump. Well, not exactly that, but the hard-worked, ill-conditioned camel of the Hijaz has very little hump, a mere slight elevation of the dorsal ridge, more thickly clothed with wool than the rest of the body, over which the saddle fits. The saddle is a long bag of coarse sacking about the thickness of a large pillow and twice the length of the camel's back. When put on, it is doubled round above the tail and the ends kept together at the shoulders by a wooden fixture constructed much on the same principle as our pack saddles. This huge ungainly brute is endowed with a stupidity and helplessness, perfectly pitiable, and its temper is diabolical. While being laden, it gives vent to spuming, spluttering, bellows, and whines not unlike what the roars of an enraged Krupus lion might be supposed to be. I never recall to my mind a camel, but I picture it biting, or trying to bite something, an operation for which its peculiar dental arrangement well adapts it. It never loses an opportunity of biting anything it dares bite, and it dares bite anything but a Badawi. Some will even occasionally venture a sly nibble at their masters, by whom they are brutally treated. They are seldom to be seen without saddle sores, raw ulcers as often covering a surface of feet as inches, and they always die in harness. Though the camel, if allowed, will drink freely twice a day, I have myself ridden them 3 days from water to water, during which their great sufferings were most evidently exhibited. In some places the road, over an otherwise trackless plain, was literally marked out by lines of their bleached skeletons, many hundreds of which I have seen, and have often pulled the huge bones apart. The camel's pace in caravan is about 2.5 miles an hour, and a fair load 1/4 of a ton. They may be hired for $1.50 a day. This hire varies somewhat with circumstances, and the average price of a camel ranges from $30 to $60, but there are, of course, fancy prices given for first-rate animals. The Turkish government used the Egyptian camel, which is a third camel and much stronger variety than either of the Hijaz camels, though I have been told it has not the same endurance. Altogether, camels are more numerous in the Hijaz than in any other part of the East to which I have been. I estimated, so far as such a thing was possible, that there could not have been less than 60,000 assembled on the plain of Arafat on the day of the celebration there. The Hijaz can scarcely be called a country of horses at all, as there are few to be found other than those of the Turkish mounted troops. These are the well-known hardy little Arabs, good horses at their worst. They are never groomed, and they are badly shod, their hoofs are not paired, and consequently present some curious malformations, but that nature has given the Arab an abnormally perfect foot. The coronet or pastern might be the point of contact with the ground. No frog, no foot is most assuredly not one of the many sores common to both East and West, for here when the shoe, which is a flat plate of iron with a small hole in the center, is removed, it invariably discloses the frog in a high state of decay. There are a few horses of the finer Arab kinds belonging to rich Arabs. A good Meccan gentleman's riding horse can be purchased for $100. A few horses, a very few, 108. I think I saw 3, are owned by the Bedouin, and they must be hardy brutes indeed to live at all under the treatment they experience. The marked traits of the Hijaz horse generally are its inability to trot or leap, its even temperament, steady nerve, and a knack of lying down with you like a camel, after having been kept standing for a time. The donkey of the Hijaz is, I think, peculiar to that country. I am not aware that I have seen the variety anywhere else. It is totally different from the Egyptian. In form it may be said to take the place among donkeys of the Flemish horse among horses, exceedingly powerful to look at, but with this difference, it is a good un to go, and very willing, though, like most donkeys, it steers aft. Its color is white, with the black markings very clearly defined. A good donkey may be bought for about $30. Caravans of them between Mecca and Jeddah start nightly after sunset, and reach their destination before daylight, a distance of over 40 miles, either carrying men or heavily laden. Donkeys are said to last 3 years at this work, and when no longer fit for it, are valued very highly as private riding donkeys, on account of the working habits they have acquired. There is also a small black variety, not nearly so common as the white one. I saw no donkeys in the Hijaz with rough coats, or of the common mouse color. The mule, always by large jackasses, is a very fine animal here, and though the mare is seldom over 14 hands, the mule often stands that height. I was told of a jackass in Medina as big as a horse, but did not see it when I was there, though I have seen them in Mecca very big indeed. I saw no cows or oxen of any kind, but was told they existed. I am inclined to account for this on the supposition that they are a transparent description of lean kind, browsing, as they must, on a pasturage of sand, small stones, and dead gooseberry bushes, the more so as the sheep and goats, which I did see, can be called little more than semi-opaque, and might be driven about the dark lanes of Mecca at night, with lighted candles inside them, to advantage. There are many varieties of sheep and goats in the Hejaz, close-haired, straight-horned sheep like goats, and woolly, curly-horned goats like sheep, so that the mass of fat round the root of the tail in the sheep is really the only distinguishing mark. This not unusually weighs as much as 6 or 8 pounds. The price of a sheep or goat ranges, according 110. To its size and condition, from $1 to $5. All the domestic animals are branded, the horses and sheep moderately, but camels and donkeys are sometimes seamed and scarred from head to foot in all manner of fanciful devices most painful to see, reminding one of periods of torture through which the animals must have passed. I have seen a Badawi engaged for more than an hour on the skin of a camel with a red-hot iron. Canine scavengers are as numerous and interesting in Mecca as in Constantinople or anywhere else in the East, and notwithstanding their numbers, the great heat, and scarcity of water, rabies is almost unknown. I heard vague rumors of a hunting dog to be found in the country, but never came across it. Cats abound, and are lank, large-eared, and small-headed. The monkeys in this country are, without exception, the most grotesque, quaint little creatures of their kind. I once came upon a pack of about 5 of these dog-like little monkeys on Jebel Nur, and found them very tame, though much too wide awake to allow themselves to be caught. Stories told by the Arabs of their thieving and imitative propensities entirely lack point, unless you grant the beasts, as a matter of course, great reasoning powers. I know it is universally accepted as a fact that monkeys can talk, but will not, for fear they should be made to work, though I believe this to be but badly authenticated by the unsupported evidence of only one sailor, who stated that he roasted a live monkey in an oven till it cried out, "Could any mortal man stand this?" However, be it known, on the indisputable authority of an intelligent native, that a sage, Sheikh of Arabia, satisfactorily settled that question ages ago when monkeys could talk, which they cannot do now. One Sheikh Ali brought 12 monkeys into a yard. You are to suppose these are primal sheikh and primal monkeys, the progenitors of all sheikhs and all monkeys. This is a very favorite groundwork to any piece of thoroughly reliable Eastern history. Well, Sheikh Ali went up to the first of the dozen monkeys and, pointing to a stone, addressed it something in this style: "Now then, I want you to move along that stone, or, much as I may regret it, I shall have to make a decapitated ape of you. Come, walk round, exhibit, show the ladies your agility, alhamdulillah, hurry up, Allah Akbar." But the artful beast remained inattentive and apparently preoccupied. "Away they have." Quoth the Sheikh, "My conviction is that that's altogether too logical a lie. Bismillah," and whipped off its head, and so on through the lot till he came to the 12th, an unsent lady he had considerately spared till last, which got up and walked away with the stone without being asked, explaining that now it was the last of its race it did not mind confessing it could talk, but swore that the accomplishment should die with it. "May dogs defy your great-grandmother's beard," said the Sheikh. "Certainly," said the monkey, "but it taught none of its progeny the faculty of speech. I wonder if it is true there are a great many of these little baboons kept as pets in Mecca. Sometimes they are tied in the doorways and make very good gatekeepers. There could be few things much more amusing than to see one of these little men objecting to a stranger. I can understand their having been quite the rage at Jerusalem in Solomon's time. Rats and mice swarm. There are eagles in the country, as a Badawi once tried to sell me a large pair of wings, and hawks of many species are numerous. Vultures and kites wheel in circles over all inhabited localities, or share the carrion, of which there is no lack, with the ravens and crows. Fowls are plentiful, though eggs are rather dear, seldom being less than a piastre for 4. Desert grouse, partridges, and quails are brought to the bazaars by Badawi children, who snare them and knock them over with sticks. Blue rock pigeons are to be seen here in large numbers, such as are probably not to be met with elsewhere. I amused myself for some time by counting smaller flocks and comparing them with larger, so estimating the number to be seen at one time in the harem, which could not have been less than between 5,000 and 6,000. They are so tame that they feed freely from the hand. The reason of this extreme fearlessness is that they are held to be almost sacred, more so than any other Meccan animal, unless, perhaps, the swallow. They are considered the property of the harem, and are, I believe, never killed. I have occasionally gone out into the harem to feed these birds, after the manner of the pilgrims, who purchase baskets of mixed and damaged grain sold for the purpose. The moment you leave the pavement you become the vortex of a revolving storm of pigeons, the air taking a leaden hue above and about you, while the view is completely obscured by the cloud of birds, and the grain is whisked out of your basket, and your clothes whirled about by the wind from their wings. The noise is deafening, and you are glad to empty your basket and escape. Or I have sometimes sat down in the middle of the turmoil, and let the birds light on me and struggle over me, the ground for yards round paved 2 or 3 deep with their fluttering bodies. When the grain is finished they disperse over the square or to the neighboring bazaars. I observed among these birds a number of interesting varieties curiously like our commoner domestic varieties. My attention was called to this, shortly after my arrival in Mecca, by seeing a Jacobin-looking specimen, which I afterwards saw always in the same flock, as I knew by the number of birds composing it. This bird I at first supposed to be distinct, but I afterwards ascertained that no pigeons were to be found in the district other than wild ones, and indeed where every house has its sitting bird in some room or another. In one room, I saw as many as 5 nests with eggs or young ones in them, on niches placed high up in the wall apparently for that purpose. Any attempt to introduce a permanent variety would be a failure, as it would soon be absorbed into the more numerous stock. I saw many in which the bars on the wings and tail were single, reduced to a mere blotch on 1 or 2 feathers, or absent altogether, while a strawberry tinge across the back is not at all uncommon. The tumbling peculiarity of one of our pigeons is to be seen, and appears to be used as a means of suddenly stopping to alight during swift flight. As these birds have existed in their present state probably for centuries, such varieties can scarcely result from occasional temporary introductions of distinct kinds, and are more likely to have been developed naturally in the condition in which the birds live. The swallows are held in the greatest regard, and are allowed to build in the harem. The beautiful Saracenic arch, about 50 feet high, forming the Gate of Abraham, is completely disfigured by the masses of mud composing clusters of their nests. This respect for the swallows is held on account of a belief that they were the instruments by which Mecca was saved from an Abyssinian army in the same year as Mohammed's birth. The tradition is that God sent these birds with 3 small stones each, 1 in the beak and 2 in the claws, which they dropped on the heads of the Abyssinians, and which miraculously penetrated the bodies of men and elephants to the ground till only one of the invaders was left alive, who fled back to his own country, and had just finished telling the news to his king when one of the swallows, which he had observed following him overhead from Mecca, dropped its stone and killed him. It occurred to me, as a possible explanation, that if a swallow had been seen to drop one of the particles of mud they carry to make their nests, this, together with a sudden panic, might have given rise to a fiction that would have been quite a solid foundation for such a piece of history in the East, but I have since come across the subjoined note in Syed Amir Ali's Life of Mohammed. To the statement in the note at the foot of the account of this event exemplifies well how legends grow among uncultured nations. The invaders were destroyed by some pestilential epidemic, probably smallpox, and the word al-hasabat, which signifies pustules, also signifying small stones. The origin of the legend that the army was destroyed by stones showered from heaven can easily be traced. I may add that if a sepoy army were to encamp in the valley of Mecca tomorrow it would be quite in the ordinary course if a week hence it had not a man capable of doing sentry go from pustules, the Mecca disease, which I have already alluded to. The above tradition had matured into its present form, and was recorded during the life of Mohammed as a fact. The cosmopolitan little house sparrow twitters on your windowsill here, as where does it not? A few small birds of the flycatcher family are to be found in the desert. Snakes are all over the country, though nowhere very numerous or large. Some are very venomous indeed. One of our party was bitten on the toe by one which had escaped. By the man's description of its appearance, it was a yellow and black spotted slender snake, about 18 inches long, and he almost succumbed to the bite, remaining insensible for about 3 hours, nor did he recover the shock for some weeks. There are a few large lizards among the rocks, and a little yellow fellow who frequents the houses amused me for what would have been many a weary hour, watching him hunting flies on the ceiling. Scorpions, tarantulas, spiders, centipedes, and all creeping creatures abound. Cockroaches an inch and a half long may be brought to bay in any corner, or stalk past you with a contemptuous wave of a 3-inch antenna. Clouds of locusts cross the country at times, and are always more or less abundant. The Arabs eat them, the children looking upon them as a great treat, buying halfpennyworths of the men who hawk them about the streets in baskets very suggestive of shrimps, to which they do bear a distant resemblance, both in the shape of their bodies, their great percentage of legs and spines, and in taste, which is rather fishy and very oily. I gave them a fair trial, but could not bring myself to like them, apart from the idea they are not good eating. I was told the Arabs caught them by setting fire to the dry vegetation over which they were flying, or among which they had alighted, and so suffocating them by camel loads. When caught in this way, they receive no other cooking than the slight scorching and smoking of the light fire into which they fall. The honey of wild bees is to be bought in the bazaars for about 5 piastres a pound. A few butterflies are to be met with in the sylvan districts, and moth doth corrupt the worst kind in the urban. Carrion flies of every description are a pest in Mecca, though not equaling the perpetual fly plague of Egypt. Mosquitoes are troublesome, but there are many worse places than Mecca for mosquitoes, so I will not ask my most incredulous reader to strain at my gnat. All other carnivorous, man-eating invertebrates infest the place, and rare feeding ground they find it. This finishes the somewhat limited fauna of Mecca, nor do I think I have omitted to mention a single creature that came under my notice. The flora is not quite so limited as the fauna. Though the general appearance of the country is bare rock or sandy desert, there is no part absolutely without a little vegetation. In some places there are large savannas of coarse grass like long stubble, and in others small jungles of gorse and broom-like growths, not in the least like gorse or broom on close inspection, only presenting the same appearance in the landscape, all good grazing for camels, for the camel munches greedily large mouthfuls of desert thorns, the spikes of which make stilettos used for embroidering, and compared to which a white briar in December would be a luscious morsel, a birch broom a delicate tidbit. In the most arid and rocky parts small stunted shrubs crop up here and there, enough to support a few sheep and goats. Among these an absinthine plant, one of the favorite adornments of the filthy Farka, deserves mention for its remarkably sweet scent and delightfully fresh greenness. The whole of the surrounding country is dotted over with widely dispersed spots of most thorough fertility where almost anything can be grown: wheat, dates, apples, or oranges. These places are assiduously cultivated, and send a great variety of fruit to the market. The watermelons and pomegranates are perhaps the best in the world. One kind of pomegranate has the seed so soft that they may be eaten with pleasure. A much-worn green dye is procured by a simple process from the skin of the pomegranate. This color in Mecca is not worn exclusively by the Quraysh, nor is it looked upon as the mark of a three-pilgrimage pilgrim, as has been said by some writer. Vegetables are dear, though nearly every kind, but potatoes and cabbages is grown. The thorny acacia and tamarisk supply firewood and small timber. Beams and rafters are made of the split trunk of the date tree, and laths for roofing from its fronds. I suppose I should be doing something unprecedented were I to write a book, however small, on Arabia and say nothing about dates, and I admit myself rather puzzled to think of something to say about them that everybody does not know. Dates are the staple article of food in Mecca, though bread runs them very close. Still, I have scarcely ever seen bread eaten without dates, and I have often seen dates eaten without bread, so dates may be allowed to be the staff of life here. There are many kinds, but of whatever quality, they are a trifle dearer than the same would be in London. At times, and in places, the streets of Mecca are almost laid with date stones. Painful looking old women and miserable Hindi beggars gather these and sell them, for they have, in quantities, a considerable value, being about the most nutritious fodder the country affords for milch camels or sheep, a few hours soaking in water softening them so as to be easily masticated. The largest and best-colored stones are carefully sorted out and sold to be turned on the lathe into rather pretty beads. Mecca producing nothing itself depends on external sources even for its dates. Most of the gardens are said to lie in the direction of Taif, a town 3 days' journey east of Mecca, which I did not visit. It is the sanatorium of Mecca, where many of the rich Meccans spend the months of August and September, the season at Taif, living on grapes and honey among cool breezes, as I heard it put. Besides the produce of Arabia, great quantities of fruit and vegetables are imported from Egypt, and timber from Burma. Though I do not know the mast from the gun in geology, so to speak, a man must indeed have gone through a country like this blindfold not to have observed the wonderfully rapid changes in the surface of the land so palpably in process under your very eyes. If the reader remembers, on our way to Mecca, we journeyed over some 28 miles of sandy plain, from the sea to the beginning of a rocky region. This border extends up and down the entire coast of the Hijaz, and is, on a fair average, about 30 miles across. I have at different times travelled over probably 400 miles of this part of the country, and found it everywhere of the nature of a dry sea, beach. On entering this most unpromising desert from inland, before you are 5 miles past the last ridge of rock, you will pick up a decayed fragment of the shell of some flinty old bivalve, and ere long you will find yourself passing over beds of bleached and rotten seashells. Turn your camel from the beaten track, and there will be a crunching underfoot as though walking over afternoon tea cups. As you advance over this all but perfectly barren waste, you will find everywhere similar indications, immense tracts of large water-worn pebbles, or ditto of small shingle and tiny shells set to a hardness like conglomerate rock, and, overlying these, another feature will be miles in area of dusty shifting sand, stirred up by the lightest breeze, or at the bottom of some gentle long undulation you may come upon a crust of fine like clay 2 or 3 inches thick, a greasy yellow slough. Yesterday in the shower, and in the solar oven of today baked hard as pot, cracked and seemed like the enamel on old china, with all the little segments loosened from their beds and some of them curled up into positive drain pipes. In such places the camels have a hard road to travel, for, when it is wet, they slip and sprawl about on it and often sprain themselves badly, and when dry the hard curled-up cakes break under their weight and cut their feet in either case. If lamed so as to be unable to keep up with the rest, their throats are cut to save their lives. As you draw nearer to the sea the shells become noticeably harder and have not the mother-o'-pearl scaled off them, and you may traverse hard black marley patches covered with a white saline efflorescence like hoarfrost. Even here something will grow. Every 200 or 300 yards a little green plant, an inch or 2 high, or small bed of violet-flowered vetches, quite startling as seen beneath your camel on the eye returning from glaring painfully over a hot waste of glittering plain with nothing more substantial to obstruct the view than a few curling sand pillars flitting about an uncertain horizon in little whirlwinds. These are always most numerous on the hottest days, when the discomfort is too great to admit of your taking any interest in them, but if seen towards evening their rapid movements and changing forms may be watched with great interest, and you may chance to see the description of the poet realized. Before my dreamy eye stretches the desert with its shifting sand, its unimpeded sky. And, borne aloft by the sustaining blast, this little golden thread dilates into a column high and vast, a form of fear and dread. And onward, and across the setting sun, across the boundless plain, the column and its broader shadow run, till thought pursues in vain. Longfellow, I cannot swear that I ever did reach the sea, except at Jeddah, not having actually felt the water elsewhere, and at the other points on the coast, where I came nearest to it, sandpits and growing reefs blended into shallows and retreating creeks in such a way that there was really no defined junction of land and water, and besides, in places like this, the mirage is so constant and plays such extraordinary freaks that a man would be a fool to believe his eyes. So much for the superficial deposits of the coast, a good deal of which is not geology, I am afraid, and has led me wandering from Mecca. The nature of the strata, save the mark, its rocks are about as much stratified as are the various components in a bowl of Scotch broth. For the materials of which the hills about Mecca are composed, I suppose there is not a possible mineral combination, plutonic, metamorphic, or eruptive, of which a specimen could not be procured from the hills of Mecca. How a geologist would revel in it! A mangled limb of old Mother Earth, compound comminuted fracture, bones protruding, exposing the very marrow of the world, or better, call them skeletons of mountains, around you on every side, pile after pile of naked rocky ribs falling apart, crumbling to pieces as you look at them, burying themselves in their own ctebris, fantastic ruins, the sides clothed with fragments of themselves, to be cast off only to make room for others, and help to swell the level plain, creeping steadily up like an ocean tide. Of all the countries in the world in which I have been, I have beheld not conditions so favorable for rapid disintegration of rock as the sudden extremes of heat and cold of this part of Arabia, and I never, not even in an earthquake, so fully realized having seen nature at work as when I felt I had caught her in the act, reducing those iron rocks. I have slept at night on them. I may here mention in passing that I should be very much surprised if it had been recorded of Jacob, that he, similarly situated, did not have a bad dream, pace of the serious reader. I have lain on those rocks on a chilly night and heard them crack and felt the dust from them fall on my face. Sitting one day on a hill about 150 feet high, perhaps a mile or so to the west of Mecca, half round the base of which passes a road called the Sultan's Road, I noticed on the plain below a formation which struck me as very curious and set me speculating. All along the side of the road opposite to the hill, from the point where the road first touched the hill to the point where it left it, a distance of about 400 yards, extended as symmetrical a stone heap as ever lay by the side of an English highway, but of Brobdingnagian proportions, about 15 feet high and 50 feet across. Between it and the hill ran a smooth beaten camel path wide enough for 2 laden camels to pass one another. I soon guessed the way in which this stone heap had been made. Bedouin, as they walk along leading their camels, throw out of the path all stones over a certain size which would be likely to hurt the feet of the camels if trodden on by them unexpectedly, and in this way this vast heap had been formed. To prove it, I took the trouble to push a few stones down into the road, and the very next Badawi who came past gave me the satisfaction of seeing him do a share in a public work of collecting all the pieces of stone larger than a walnut that fell from the hill, and depositing them in a heap by themselves. If, as its name seems to imply, this road has been made since the Turkish occupation of the Hejaz, the hill, other things considered, looks to have shed about 1/10 of its entire bulk in 300 years. Of the many other interesting workings of nature on an unusual scale in this country, I have seen a sandstorm, by forming drifts, alter a landscape in a few hours, and the triturating action on the rocks of this sand, with which the air is so loaded during any fresh breeze as to give the appearance of a yellow fog, is very considerable, as all the harder nodules of stone lying in the valleys are rounded on their upper surfaces, as though water, worn from this cause. A rainstorm raised the valley of Mecca 6 inches, of which a description will be given in due course. I have seen a mound of sand 100 feet high in the open desert, for which I could not account, unless it were a tenable theory that it had accumulated round some such nucleus as the growths over a spot fertilized by a dead body. But now I think enough has been said to illustrate the extraordinary rate at which geologic change goes on over the surface of this country, and possibly to prepare you to agree that Arabia the Blessed may not have been quite such a fabulous country after all. Say 5,000 years ago, after having passed through the first stages of natural change in which, as geologists tell us, the finer soil-forming particles from the rocks would have been brought down to the well-watered lower levels, might it not be in accordance with scientific principles if Arabia had been a country of richly fertile valleys? How much so may be judged from the almost rank productiveness of any place where the water is not too deeply buried under sand and stones even at this day. I will not say how rich I believe the Hejaz to be in metals, because, understanding nothing of mineralogy, my opinion would be worth little. I know, however, as a matter of fact, that gold is procured by the Bedouin, and that there is in Mecca a large sale of precious stones, which are found in the country, and moreover, the Arabia of the ancients is also the Arabia of the Scriptures. Then why should these concurrent testimonies be doubted? For my part, I think it most likely that the gardens and lakes of Arabia have, in the course of nature and during the historic era, been buried under the ruins of its mountains. The often quoted explanation, which accounts for the difference between the Arabia of today and the Arabia known to Solomon, and described by the ancients on the supposition that they were designedly misled by the Egyptians and Phoenicians, who themselves traded only in the wealth of India, seems to me to be utterly feeble. The dollar called rial, in which I have given all the prices, is, with the English pound, called guinea, and the Turkish piastre, the standard currency of the country, though every gold and silver coin known can be readily changed. The most common and most preferred dollar is the Austrian Maria Theresa, and I noticed that although they were all dated about 1790, such a great proportion of them looked new, that I fancy they must have been struck since that date, if they are not now being coined somewhere. The only copper coins current are the Turkish piastre and parts of a piastre, so that as pilgrims bring only gold and silver, they find a great scarcity of small change, and lie shopkeepers can refuse to sell if you offer to pay with a coin worth more than 3 times the value of the article to be purchased. The money changers charge an unvarying rate of a half piastre in the dollar. The shops are of the ordinary Eastern description. A low platform facing the street, on which samples of the wares are exposed, behind which the dealer sits in a room containing the bulk of his merchandise. The bazaars do not follow the rule, as in other Eastern countries, of all shops in the same line of business being collected in the same locality, the order being oftener, a dealer in European commodities, a fruiterer, a baker, and a gunsmith, or anything else, the butchers being the only dealers who stick to a particular marketplace. All things considered, order and honesty are kept up to a wonderful degree in Mecca, theft being not nearly so common as might be expected. No indications of female profligacy are publicly observable, and, apart from existing legislative prohibitions, would not indeed be tolerated by the pilgrims. Spirits or wine are not to be procured by the uninitiated outsider, though I did meet with one adventurous Egyptian speculator who was making a good thing out of eau de cologne, selling it as a medicine for head or heartache, to be taken internally, until it was discovered to be a spirit, when all his stock was thrown into the street and his bottle smashed by the mob, the owner only escaping with his life. The water, which is very bad, is plentiful, that is to say, can always be got for a price. The sanitary condition of the place is wonderful, considering what a cesspool the valley of Mecca really is, there being no outlet whatever from the valley for the sewage, which must percolate down into the wells, and I strongly suspect that the water of the well Zam-Zam owes much of its virtue to ammonia, it being in the center of the city and at the lowest level in the valley. Notwithstanding the general squalor, unhealthy condition, and indescribable filthiness of the place, I believe no very great plague is known to have visited Mecca. This might be accounted for by the exceeding dryness and clearness of the atmosphere, in which dead flesh generally dries without decomposing, and the fact that the majority of the population are men who have been in a physical condition which has enabled them to perform a long journey, consequently much enfeebled constitutions among the great mass are rare, and that the pilgrim frame of mind is such as to render him not liable to disease, for, if faith works the wonders accredited to it, there should be few sick men in Mecca. Another, and perhaps the main, reason is that famine, the usual precursor of pestilence, cannot reach Mecca, since there is no great lower class in absolute destitution. The thousand seen begging are beggars at a fair, reaping the yearly harvest of supplies and wealth brought by the pilgrims. It is not surprising that Mohammedans attribute the comparatively small rate of mortality among the community to a perpetual miraculous interposition of Providence in behalf of Mecca the inviolable. The climate is subject to occasional heavy downpours of rain in the winter months, seldom lasting longer than a few hours. The temperature is extremely variable. I have sat at night shivering, fingers blue and teeth chattering with cold, and have been on the afternoon of the same day scorched by the dry heat till my lips cracked. I often wished for a thermometer, which would have shown some curious fluctuations. I am convinced that the shade temperature would at times have ranged from 40 degrees to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. In 24 hours. The history of Mecca shows it to have passed through fully its share of the exigencies of flood, fire, and sword. The pilgrimage to Mecca and almost all the ceremonies connected with it were ancient customs of the Arabs at the time of Mohammed, and were believed by him to be of divine origin, and so adopted into his faith.